If you've ever been swept off your feet, you've finally been seen, that you're finally safe, and then watched it all crash into confusion, disconnection, or control, might have been in what we call a fantasy bond. I'm Michelle McGowan, licensed clinical counselor, and today we're unpacking why so many of us mistake fantasy for intimacy, especially when we carry wounds that tell us that real love has to feel like intensity. And most importantly, we'll be talking about how to break that pattern so we can choose something safer, slower, and more real. So what is a fantasy bond? Basically, a fantasy bond is a false sense of closeness that forms through idealization and emotional merging. It's not true emotional intimacy. A fantasy bond often feels like instant connection, obsession, and infatuation. It often feels like talking for hours and saying things like, I feel like I've known you forever. It can feel like over-disclosure too soon. It can feel like wanting to be everything to each other right away. But I want you to recognize that these feelings aren't the same thing as true and real intimacy. In a fantasy bond, you're falling in love with what they represent to you, not who they are. And fantasy bonds can feel good, and they can even feel addictive, because a fantasy bond really does bypass the vulnerability of being truly seen. And if you grew up in an environment with unmet emotional needs, or if you had to be the perfect child to receive love, or if you learned that love is something that you have to constantly earn, then someone swooping in your life and saying that you're it, you're everything, you're my soulmate, and that can feel like being picked first in a team that you've always been benched from, which can activate old longings, and it can hit a wound that says maybe, just maybe, I'm finally good enough now. And fantasy bonds often begin with love bombing and grand declaration, intense physical closeness early on, a sense of urgency, like if we don't do this now, we'll lose it. It can feel like safety, but it's actually a defense mechanism, especially in people who are anxious or disorganized attachment. The bond is built fast, and that bond is built fast not because they know you, it's because they fear abandonment, or they're avoiding their own emptiness. And it becomes less about you and more about what you represent to them. And that right there is where the danger lies. So let me break this down a little bit more to you in the lens of attachment theory. Anxious attachment craves closeness, and they fear abandonment. So the fantasy bond feels like safety, finally someone who chooses me, but soon you find yourself walking on eggshells to keep that relationship going. An avoidant attachment, they fear engulfment and vulnerability, and they may create fantasy bonds by idealizing from a distance and then disconnecting when things get real. With disorganized attachment, you swing between craving intimacy and fearing intimacy. So fantasy bonds feel like salvation one minute and suffocation the next minute. So with disorganized attachment, you tend to chase love and then you sabotage that love. But secure attachment, and that's where we want to be securely attached. With secure attachment, you take time. You build trust slowly. You want real connection, not just that feeling of closeness. And fantasy bonds and a secure type of connection feels off, and it can feel like too much, too fast, too soon, because they are. So ask yourself these questions. Number one, do I feel like I need this person to validate my self-worth? Number two, are we skipping steps and getting too close too fast? Number three, do I feel chosen instead of truly known? Number four, am I ignoring red flags because the connection feels so intense? So if your nervous system feels on fire instead of calm, it's probably not love, because love should feel safe, love should feel curious, and love should feel reciprocal. Love should not feel like a rush and rescue mission. So breaking the fantasy bond pattern starts with awareness, because once you become aware, you can't become unaware. Then you want to get curious about your early relationships. And in those relationships, were you emotionally attuned or were you emotionally ignored? Practice slowing down, even if that slowing down feels uncomfortable to you. And let connection build through experience, not declarations. And do that internal work that needs to be done, whether it's reparenting yourself, going to therapy, journaling, or nervous system regulation. Just do that internal work. And the goal is not to avoid closeness, it's to build closeness in a way that's sustainable, and to build closeness in a way that's safe and that's real. Because you don't need anyone's fantasy to be worthy of love, and you don't need to be their everything to be enough. What you do deserve is someone who takes time to know you, not just name you. If this video resonated with you, explore the Real Red Flag series, where we untangle the red flags from the real thing, where we help you build better bonds inside and out. And I'll see you on the next episode.